The winter feast should have been a night of family tradition and warmth, but instead it became the stage for betrayal. My son Damien stood before the gathered guests and declared that I was no longer fit to control my own estate. His wife Clara smiled, certain they had already won. But what they did not know was that I had been watching, waiting, and preparing for this very moment. Beneath my chair rested a folio filled with secrets that would shatter their scheme and turn the feast into their downfall. What happened next left the entire room in stunned silence, and my son trembling with fear. Before we begin, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now let me take you inside the mansion on that stormy night where the truth was finally revealed. The storm raged against the cliffs outside the wind, shrieking like a chorus of restless ghosts. Lightning flared across the sky, casting the sea into sharp silver for the briefest of moments before plunging it back into blackness. Inside the Blackwell estate, candles flickered in the great hall, their flames dancing in the drafts that slipped through the ancient windows. The winter feast had begun, though there was little warmth in the air. Guests sat stiffly around the long oak table, their expressions a mixture of polite smiles and quiet unease. The room smelled of roasted lamb and spiced wine, yet beneath those comforts lingered something colder, heavier. At the head of the table stood my son Damien, tall and broad, shouldered, his dark hair gleaming in the candlelight. He raised his glass with a confidence that made the room fall silent. His wife Clara sat beside him, elegant in a gown of deep crimson, her eyes glinting with something sharper than joy. She had always carried herself like a queen in waiting, and tonight that ambition burned brighter than ever. Arthur Blackwell sat midway down the table, watching, listening, my hands folded in my lap. The faces of cousins, neighbors, and distant relatives reflected the glow of the candles, their eyes darting between Damien and myself, sensing something unspoken stirring in the air. Damien cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was strong, deliberate, and rehearsed. Family, friends, honored guests. Tonight is a night of tradition. A night when we celebrate the bonds that keep us together. But sometimes tradition must give way to progress. A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Forks paused halfway to mouths, glasses lowered to the table. His words carried an edge, though few yet understood the blade he was about to draw. I studied him carefully, noting the way Clara leaned ever so slightly toward him, her smile widening like a predator scenting blood. Damien's gaze found me. He lifted his glass higher, his voice rising with it. My father has long held this estate. He has given much, and for that we are grateful. But age weighs heavily on him, and it is clear to all of us that he can no longer bear the burden of leadership. For the good of our family, and for the future, we have decided that the time has come for him to step aside. Gasps echoed through the hall. My sister-in-law covered her mouth with her hand. A cousin shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Eyes turned toward me, some filled with shock, others with pity, and still others with the spark of curiosity that comes when scandal is revealed. Damien's glass caught the light as he delivered the final blow. We have voted, and he is no longer fit to rule this house. From this night forward, the Blackwell estate will be under my care. The words struck like a hammer against stone. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the hiss of the storm outside rattling the shutters. Then whispers rose sharp and urgent, as though the walls themselves were gossiping about the betrayal that had just been spoken aloud. Clara's smile widened, her hand resting on Damien's arm in a gesture of triumph. She glanced toward me, her expression polished and cold, daring me to resist. I felt the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on me, waiting for outrage, for fury, for collapse. They expected me to falter, to stumble beneath the humiliation. But instead I smiled. A faint, steady curve of the lips that seemed to unnerve Damien more than anger ever could. Slowly I rose from my chair. The wood scraped against the floor, the sound startling in the tense silence. I reached beneath my seat and pulled out a leather folio, plain and unmarked, yet heavy with promise. Damien frowned, suspicion flickering in his eyes. Clara tilted her head slightly, her smile faltering for the first time. "I see," I said, my voice, calm, measured, carrying through the hall with ease. "You have made your choice. Then perhaps it is only fair that I present mine. I extended the folio toward Damien, my hand steady despite the fire burning in my chest. "A parting gift," I said softly. "For you, my son." Damien hesitated, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. The room held its breath. Slowly he reached out and took the folio from my hand. His fingers brushed the leather as though it might burn him. Clara leaned in, her whisper sharp. "Open it." He did. The first page turned, and I watched the color drain from his face. His eyes darted across the paper, confusion shifting into disbelief, disbelief hardening into anger. His hand trembled slightly, and he gripped the edge of the folio as though it might steady him. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking against the silence. The guests leaned forward, straining to see, to understand, but I gave them nothing. Not yet. The storm outside seemed to still for a moment, as if even the sea itself was listening. Clara's smile vanished. She snatched the folio, her eyes scanning the words, her lips tightening as she read. Her fingers dug into the pages, her knuckles pale. For the first time all evening, she looked uncertain. Damien turned toward me, fury and fear warring in his expression. "You cannot do this," he hissed. "I already have," I replied, my tone calm, almost gentle. The room erupted into whispers, once more louder, this time sharper. Cousins exchanged wide-eyed glances. Neighbors leaned across the table, whispering into each other's ears. Some looked at Damien with suspicion now, others at me with a mix of respect and unease. I stood tall, my eyes never leaving my son's. In that moment, the feast was no longer about food or family or tradition. It was a battlefield, and Damien had made his move too soon. Clara closed the folio with a snap, her eyes cold, calculating. She forced a smile, though it no longer reached her eyes. "This changes nothing," she said. But her voice lacked conviction, and I could see the cracks forming in the mask she wore so carefully. I said nothing more. I did not need to. The seed had been planted, and it would grow into something far stronger than their schemes. The storm outside roared again, lightning illuminating the hall in a flash of white. For an instant, the faces around the table looked ghostly, caught between the old world and the new. I returned to my seat, my expression serene. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. The night had only just begun, and the game was far from over. Damien tried to speak again, but the words caught in his throat. He set the folio down with a thud, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white. Clara leaned close, whispering furiously into his ear, her eyes darting around the room as though searching for allies among the guests. But I knew what they did not yet realize. Their plan had already begun to unravel. The feast continued in uneasy silence, forks scraping against plates, glasses raised but left untouched. Laughter no longer echoed in the hall. Instead, there was only tension, heavy and suffocating, as though the very air had turned against them. I watched Damien from across the table. He avoided my gaze, now his confidence shattered, his pride wounded. Clara kept her hand on his arm, but I saw the tremor in her fingers. They were rattled, shaken, and desperate to regain control. And I, patient as the tide, knew that this was only the beginning. For the folio he had opened tonight contained only the first hint of what I had discovered, only a glimpse of the storm that awaited them. The true weight of it, the full measure of their own ruin, had yet to be revealed. And as the feast dragged on, the storm outside, echoing the storm within, I sat in silence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The feast ended in uneasy silence. Guests excused themselves early, their eyes darting nervously between Damien and me as they slipped into the stormy night. The heavy oak doors closed behind the last of them, leaving only the hollow echo of their departure. The great hall, once filled with laughter and clinking glasses, now felt like a battlefield after the fighting had stopped. The long table stood, abandoned plates of untouched food cooling, and the draught candles, guttering low in their holders. Damien lingered at the head of the table, his shoulders stiff, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching beneath his skin. Clara stood beside him, her crimson gown glowing like spilled wine in the dying light. She whispered in his ear, her words sharp, her hand gripping his arm as though anchoring him in place. He nodded once, then turned his gaze on me. His eyes no longer held triumph. They held something darker, suspicion, fury. and the first flicker of fear. I rose slowly, gathering my coat from the back of my chair. The folio still lay on the table between us, its plain leather surface now, a wall that neither of them dared touch again. Without a word, I slipped it beneath my arm. Clara's eyes followed it like a hawk tracking prey. I met her gaze and smiled faintly. That smile unsettled her more than anger could have. "Good night," I said, my voice calm, steady. Then I left them to the storm. Upstairs in the quiet of my study, I sat by the fire and thought about what I had witnessed. Damien's betrayal did not surprise me. I had felt it coming for months. But what struck me most was Clara. Her ambition blazed so brightly it seemed to consume her. She had guided Damien to this moment, her whispers shaping his thoughts, her hand steering his decisions. He was the voice, but she was the echo behind it, sharper and more dangerous. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the dancing flames. What did she truly want? Power, wealth, prestige. Yes, those were obvious. But ambition like hers always hid something deeper, something more desperate, and I meant to find it. The next morning the storm had cleared. Frost glazed the windows, and the sea below sparkled with deceptive calm. I rose early, moving quietly through the mansion. Damien and Clara still slept their doors, closed, the echo of last night's confrontation, surely still weighing heavy in their dreams. In the eastern wing of the house, a small study had been converted into Clara's private retreat. She spent hours there, always claiming it was for correspondence and social duties. But I knew better. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside. The room was immaculate, every item placed with deliberate precision. On the desk sat a stack of catalogs, their glossy pages displaying imported chandeliers, velvet drapes, marble staircases, the kind of luxuries that had no place in a house built on centuries of endurance and restraint. I turned a page and stared at the price. One chandelier alone cost more than my first ship. My lips tightened. Clara's vision for the Blackwell estate was not preservation, it was consumption. Beside the catalogs lay a folder of papers, renovation contracts. I opened one and scanned the inflated estimates. Floors, torn up walls, replaced new furniture imported from overseas. A project that would drain any fortune within months. And at the bottom, in Damien's handwriting, was a signature. He had already committed, already promised money that was not his to spend. I set the papers down carefully, my pulse steady despite the storm rising within me. Their betrayal was not only personal, it was practical. They meant to strip the house of its history, of Eleanor's touch, of everything that bound it to the family name. They would remake it into a hollow monument to their vanity. I glanced around the study again and noticed something curious. A drawer slightly ajar as though hastily closed. I pulled it open. Inside lay a collection of letters bound by ribbon. I untied them and read. They were addressed to creditors, to merchants, to banks. Pleas for more time. Promises of payment. Assurances that funds were on the way. Clara's handwriting was elegant but desperate. She had been buying on borrowed credit, piling debt upon debt. At last I understood. Their greed was not just ambition. It was survival. They had already dug themselves into a pit so deep they could no longer climb out. And now they looked at me, at the estate, as the rope that might pull them free. I slipped the letters back into the drawer, tying the ribbon carefully. Let them believe their secrets remained hidden. For now. That evening, as the sun set and shadows crept through the halls, I watched them from the doorway of the dining room. Damien paced the floor like a restless beast, his steps sharp and uneven. Clara sat at the table, her hands folded, her expression cold and calculating. They were arguing in hushed tones. "You humiliated me." Damien hissed, his voice raw with anger. "You humiliated yourself." Clara replied, her tone icy. "You should have been prepared for him. You underestimated him, Damien, and now you look like a fool in front of everyone." Damien slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing through the room. "He cannot keep doing this. He cannot keep holding everything over us." Clara leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Then take it. Take it from him. He is old, weak. The others already believe he is slipping. We will convince them. We will show them he is unfit, and the estate will be ours." I stood in the shadows, my fists tightening at my sides. Their plan was clearer than ever. They meant not only to discredit me, but to erase me. I stepped back quietly, my breath steady. They thought themselves clever. They thought their secrets were safe. But already their lies were unraveling. Over the next days, I began to notice more. Clara disappearing into town with parcels too large to be household necessities. Damien whispering with strangers near the gate. Receipts left carelessly on the kitchen counter showing purchases no honest man could afford. Everywhere I looked, there were cracks in the foundation of their scheme. One evening, as I walked past the sitting room, I caught sight of Clara's phone left on the arm of a chair. The screen glowed with an open message. I paused, reading the words that scrolled across it. A message to a cousin, spreading rumors that I was forgetful, unstable, a danger to myself. Lies woven carefully designed to spread like rot through the family. My chest tightened, but not with fear, with certainty. Their web was wide, but its threads were fragile. One tug and the whole structure would collapse. Later, alone in my room, I sat at my desk and wrote notes in a small leather book. Dates, names, debts, whispers. Every detail mattered. Every detail would become a stone in the foundation of their downfall. I thought of Eleanor, then her voice soft, her hand warm in mine. She would not have wanted this, I knew. She would have wanted peace, unity, love. But peace was no longer possible. Love had already been broken. All that remained was truth. The storm had passed, but another was coming, one far more dangerous. Damien and Clara did not yet know it, but they had already handed me the very tools I needed to destroy them. Their secrets, their debts, their arrogance, all of it would become my weapon. For now I waited, watched, collected. They believed they had wounded me, but I was stronger than they imagined. They believed they could erase me, but I was already writing their undoing. And as the fire in my study burned low, and the night deepened around the house, I whispered into the silence, not as a vow of revenge, but as a promise of justice. "You have shown me your greed," I said softly, "and soon I will show you its price." The mansion was quiet that night, but not peaceful. Silence had a weight to it, pressing against the walls, echoing through the corridors like something alive. I wandered through the great hall long after Damien and Clara had retired to their wing of the estate. The candles were nearly burned out, their wax dripping in long frozen tears. My footsteps echoed on the stone floor, the sound carrying up into the rafters where shadows clung like dark birds. I had lived in this house for decades. Each wall, each stair, each doorway carried a memory. Yet now those memories felt like ghosts drifting through the rooms, whispering to me. I paused before the great fireplace, where above the mantel hung a portrait of Eleanor, my late wife. The firelight flickered across her face, softening the edges, almost making her smile come alive again. "Eleanor," I murmured, my voice barely more than a breath, "you would not recognize our son now." I remembered her laughter the way it once filled this hall during winter gatherings. I remembered the warmth of her hand on mine, the quiet strength she gave me when times were hard. She had stood by me when I sold my first ship to pay for Damien's schooling. She had encouraged me when the nights were long and the debts were many. Everything we did for our son. I closed my eyes and the memories came sharper. Damien as a boy racing down these corridors with wooden swords, his laughter ringing like bells. Damien clutching my hand at the seaside, fair wide-eyed at the fireworks blooming above the water. Damien sitting at my desk, struggling with his studies, and me promising him that his future would be brighter because of the sacrifices we made. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man hollowed by ambition, his heart hardened by Clara's whispers. I felt a sting in my chest, not just of betrayal, but of mourning. I was grieving not only for Eleanor, but for the child. Damien once was the child who would have never spoken the words he spoke at the feast. I wandered into the library where rows of books lined the walls, their spines worn and faded. Here, too, the past lingered. I ran my fingers over the shelves, stopping at one volume Eleanor loved, a collection of poems she often read aloud by the fire. I pulled it down, opened it, and found her handwriting in the margins delicate and flowing. She had underlined words about love, loyalty, and endurance. A lump formed in my throat. For a moment I wondered if I should simply let it all go. Let Damien and Clara have their way. Leave the house, the estate, the history behind. Perhaps I thought I was too old for this battle. Perhaps Eleanor would have wanted peace above all. But then I remembered the drawer in Clara's study. The debts, the desperate letters, the greed. I remembered her voice urging Damien to declare me unfit, to erase me entirely. I remembered the look in Damien's eyes, not of sorrow or doubt, but of cold determination as he told the family I no longer belonged. No, surrender was not peace. Surrender would be letting their corruption devour everything Eleanor and I built together. Surrender would be abandoning the boy I once raised, giving him over fully to the shadows Clara had planted in his heart. I sat at the desk, pulling a small, leather-bound notebook toward me. I began to write line after line, memory after memory, not just of my sacrifices, but of theirs. Every receipt I had found, every whisper I had overheard, every rumor Clara had spread. The pages filled quickly, my handwriting tight and sharp. This was no longer just a record. It was a weapon. The night grew colder. The fire dimmed. I lit a lantern and carried it with me as I moved through the house. I found myself drawn to Eleanor's old sewing room, untouched since her passing. Dust lay thick on the shelves, but her tools remained carefully arranged, as though she had only stepped out for a moment. I sat in her chair and let the memories wash over me. In the silence, I heard her voice in my mind. Not scolding, not sorrowful, but steady. She had always believed in justice, in standing firm against wrong, no matter the cost. It was as if she whispered to me, even now, urging me not to falter. "You gave your life for them," I whispered back, my hand tightening around the arm of the chair, "and now they would cast it all aside. I cannot let that stand, Eleanor. I cannot." The lantern flame flickered shadows, shifting across the room. For an instant, it seemed as though she stood in the doorway watching me, her smile gentle but resolute. I blinked, and the vision was gone, but the resolve remained. I rose and returned to my study. The notebook lay open on the desk, the ink still glistening in places. I added more, sketching a plan that had begun to take shape in my mind. Clara and Damien thought themselves clever, but they had been careless. Their debts, their lies, their arrogance, all of it was laid bare for anyone who knew where to look. And I had always known where to look. Still, anger alone was not enough. If I struck too soon, if I revealed my hand without care, they would twist it against me. They had already begun to spread rumors of my instability. I had to be precise. I had to be patient. As dawn broke over the sea, painting the sky in pale gold, I stood at the window of my study and watched the waves crash against the cliffs. The ocean had always been a teacher to me. It taught me patience, endurance, and the power of waiting for the right tide. Now those lessons would serve me again. The house stirred to life below as servants moved through the halls preparing breakfast. I heard Damien's voice, sharp and impatient, followed by Clara's colder tones. They were already planning their next move, no doubt. I allowed myself a faint smile. Let them. Every move they made only tightened the noose they had woven for themselves. I turned back to the desk, closing the notebook. It was time to take the first step, quiet and unseen, toward their undoing. But before I moved, I allowed myself one last moment with Eleanor. I opened the book of poems, once more reading the lines she had underlined. The words spoke of truth, of light breaking through darkness. I whispered them aloud, a vow not only to her memory but to myself. Then I set the book down, extinguished the lantern, and prepared for the day. The ghosts of the past had reminded me of what was at stake. Not just a house, not just wealth, but the very soul of the Blackwell legacy. And as I stepped out of the study, the notebook tucked beneath my arm, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Damien and Clara believed they were hunters. They believed I was prey. But they had forgotten something Eleanor always knew. A cornered man is dangerous, and they had just cornered me. The day after the winter feast, the mansion seemed quieter than ever. Yet beneath that quiet ran an undercurrent like the hush before a storm breaks. Damien and Clara went about their routines with an edge in their movements, their voices clipped, their smiles thin. They avoided me when possible, but I caught their whispers at odd moments, hurried conversations that died the instant I entered the room. They believed they had shaken me. They believed I was an old man, cornered and fading. What they did not know was that I had already begun to weave a plan born not of rage, but of patience. Rage blinds a man. Patience sharpens him. That morning I pulled on my coat and stepped into the cold air. Frost coated the hedges that lined the path, crunching beneath my boots as I walked toward the village. The sea wind was sharp against my face, carrying with it the scent of salt and the echo of crashing waves. I moved with purpose, my notebook tucked beneath my arm, filled with dates and notes and whispers I had collected. In the heart of the village, in a small stone house that overlooked the harbor, lived Marcus Hale. He had once been a sea captain, a man of the tides and storms, and one of the few friends I still trusted. His body was weathered, his hair gray, but his eyes remained sharp like a hawk scanning the horizon. When I entered, Marcus looked up from his chair by the fire. He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "I wondered when you would come," he said. I took a seat opposite him, the fire warming my chilled hands. For a while, neither of us spoke. We had known each other too long to waste words on pleasantries. At last I placed the notebook on the table between us. "They are planning to strip me of everything," I said quietly. "The house, the estate, the name. They mean to declare me unfit. But their ambition runs deeper than that. They are drowning in debt, and they see me as their lifeline." Marcus leaned forward, flipping through the pages of my notes. He read in silence, his brow furrowing as he traced the lines of receipts, letters, overheard whispers. At last he closed the book and set it down. "They think age makes you weak," he said. His voice was low, steady, the voice of a man who had faced storms at sea and outlasted them. "Show them it makes you patient. They have already given you the tools. All you must do is use them." I nodded slowly. His words were a spark lighting the path that had already begun to form in my mind. From Marcus's house I made my way to the office of John Whitlock, a lawyer whose mind was as sharp as any blade. He had no ties to Damien or Clara, and his reputation was one of discretion and precision. John listened as I laid out my fears, my discoveries, my suspicions. His expression never changed, but his eyes gleamed with interest. "You have more than enough to protect yourself," he said when I finished. "If what you've shown me is accurate, their debts alone will collapse their claims. But you must tread carefully. They are already building a case that you are unstable. If you move too soon, they will twist it against you." I asked him what could be done. He outlined the first steps with cool efficiency. Certain accounts could be frozen. Documents could be filed to place the estate in trust beyond Damien's reach. Evidence of Clara's letters could be quietly gathered, ensuring they could not be denied later. And the recordings, yes, those would be the final blow. Recordings. The word echoed in my mind as I left his office. Words spoken in anger, in whispers, in confidence. Once captured, they became truth that could not be erased. Damien and Clara had grown careless with their tongues. They spoke freely in rooms they believed were safe. They underestimated me, and that would be their undoing. That evening I began the work. In the quiet of my study, I placed a small recorder on the mantel of the sitting room, another beneath the desk in the library, a third hidden in the hallway near their wing of the house. They never noticed, too consumed with their own schemes to consider that I might be listening. It did not take long. Within days I had captured Clara's voice, sharp with contempt. "He is slipping," she whispered to Damien. "The others see it. All we need is proof, and the estate will be ours. Once it is in our hands, the debts will vanish. No one will dare question us." Another night, Damien's voice heavy with frustration. "He humiliated me in front of everyone. I will not forgive him for that. This house should already be mine. We need to move faster." Their words filled my notebook, each recording transcribed and dated. Piece by piece, the web of their deceit grew clearer, and with it the shape of their downfall. Yet even as I gathered their secrets, I felt the ghosts of the past pressing close. Each time I set down my pen, Eleanor's portrait seemed to watch me from above the fireplace. Her eyes, soft and knowing, seemed to ask whether this path of quiet revenge was truly the one she would have chosen. I wrestled with that question each night. But each morning, as I overheard Clara sowing lies about my memory, as I watched Damien sign yet another extravagant order for furniture we did not need, I found my answer. This was not vengeance for vengeance's sake. This was justice. This was the protection of what Eleanor and I had built with our lives. One evening Isabella came to see me. She had been Eleanor's dearest friend, and though she had grown frail with age, her spirit remained sharp. She sat in the study with me, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I have heard whispers," she said softly. "Damien and Clara are telling others that you wander at night, that you forget names, that you repeat yourself. They mean to make the family believe you are no longer of sound mind." I felt a coldness spread through me. So they had begun their campaign in earnest. Isabella reached across the desk and placed her hand on mine. "Do not let them win, Arthur," she said. "Eleanor would not forgive you for surrendering what you built together. Fight them, but fight them wisely." Her words strengthened my resolve. When she left, I returned to my notebook, adding a new line to the record. They were not only planning to take what was mine, they were poisoning the very air around me. That made them more dangerous than ever. As the days passed, my plan grew sharper. Each move Damien and Clara made only gave me more ammunition. Every careless whisper, every desperate purchase, every letter to creditors became another stone in the foundation of their downfall. And still I waited. The tide was not yet right. The storm had not yet broken. Late one night, as I sat in the library with the lantern burning low, I heard their voices in the hall. They did not know I was there, the door left slightly ajar. "We must strike at the winter feast," Clara whispered. "That is when the family will be gathered. That is when we will strip him of everything." I leaned back in my chair, the words settling into me like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. So that was their plan. The feast would be their stage, their moment of triumph. But they had forgotten one thing. The feast would also be mine. The days that followed felt like the tightening of a noose. Each sunrise seemed to bring another small act of betrayal, another move from Damien and Clara as they pushed forward with their scheme. The mansion, once a place of memory and comfort, now felt like a hostile fortress, its very walls carrying the weight of their deception. It began with the locks. One afternoon, as I returned from the village, I slipped my key into the front door and it did not turn. I tried again, jiggling the key, pressing harder. Nothing. The lock had been changed. My own house, the house I had given my life to preserve, had been barred against me. Through the glass I saw Clara watching from the hallway. She did not smile, but her eyes gleamed with cold triumph. Slowly she turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the frost with my useless key still in my hand. I went to the side entrance, and again my key failed. The back door, the servants' door, even the cellar hatch, all had been replaced. Only the small side gate leading to the garden remained open, and even that I suspected would not stay so for long. I said nothing when Damien returned that evening. He swaggered through the hall, speaking loudly of renovations, of necessary changes. He never acknowledged the locks, but the smug tilt of his chin told me he knew exactly what he had done. The next move was subtler, but more dangerous. Rumors began to ripple through the family. At first they reached me in half whispers, a cousin asking if I had truly forgotten a name at the banquet, a neighbor remarking that they had heard I wandered the halls at night. Soon the whispers became sharper. Someone claimed I had left a candle burning unattended, nearly setting a room ablaze. Another swore I had repeated the same story 3 times in a single conversation. None of it was true, but truth mattered little when gossip spread like wildfire. Damien and Clara had begun to poison the air around me, sowing doubt in every ear they could reach. One evening, Isabella returned to the mansion, her expression troubled. She sat in my study and looked at me with eyes filled with sorrow. "They are saying you are no longer yourself," she whispered. "That grief has made you forgetful, that your mind is slipping. Some are starting to believe them, Arthur." I thanked her, though inside me a storm raged. My own son twisting my name into a shadow, painting me as weak, unstable, unfit. It was not enough to take my house, he wanted to take my dignity, my legacy, my very voice. But still I waited. Each night I returned to my hidden recordings. Each whisper I caught was another nail in their coffin. Clara's voice urging Damien to act quickly. Damien's voice dripping with anger as he complained of my senility. Their laughter cruel and careless as they spoke of the fortune they would inherit once I was gone. I listened, transcribed, recorded. Every word was preserved, every scheme captured. My notebook grew thick with evidence, my folio heavy with truth. They believed they were tightening the trap around me, but in truth they were stepping deeper into my own. One night as I walked past their wing of the mansion, I paused. Their door was ajar, and I heard Clara's voice, sharp and commanding. "We cannot wait much longer," she said. "The winter feast is coming. That will be the moment. The family will all be here. We will declare him unfit before them all, and they will have no choice but to support us." Damien's voice followed, uncertain, tinged with hesitation. "And if he resists—" Clara laughed softly, cruelly. "He will not. He will crumble, Damien. He is old. His time has passed. And when he does, the estate will be ours." I stepped back into the shadows, my heart pounding. So they had chosen their battlefield. The winter feast would be the stage of their triumph, or so they believed. In the days that followed, they grew bolder. Damien strutted through the halls as though he already owned them, giving orders to the servants inspecting rooms as if preparing them for guests who would come at his command. Clara oversaw deliveries from the village, bolts of fabric, ornate decorations, even crates of wine far finer than what we typically served. They were dressing the house not for celebration but for conquest. Yet their arrogance blinded them. They did not notice when I quietly removed certain papers from Damien's study, or when I slipped a copy of Clara's letters into my folio. They did not question why certain bank accounts they relied upon suddenly froze, leaving their creditors knocking louder at their door. They did not suspect that every move they made was being catalogued, preserved, and prepared for the very moment they believed would destroy me. One evening I sat again with Marcus in his small stone house by the harbor. I laid out my evidence before him, the pages and recordings, the debts and the lies. "They are building their stage," I said, "but they do not know I have already built mine." Marcus studied the documents, then leaned back in his chair, his expression grim but satisfied. "You have them," he said. "You hold the rope, Arthur. All you must do is pull." I nodded, but inside me there was no triumph yet, only patience. Only the steady drum of the tide against the cliffs, waiting, always waiting for the right moment. The night before the winter feast, I walked through the mansion alone. The halls were decorated with wreaths of holly and ivy candles, set in every window, the air heavy with the scent of spiced wine and roasting meats. It should have been a night of warmth, of family gathered in joy. Instead, it was the calm before the storm. I paused again before Eleanor's portrait, her painted eyes watching me with quiet strength. "Tomorrow," I whispered. "Tomorrow it ends." And as the wind howled against the shutters, I felt the storm gathering not outside but within these very walls. The day of the winter feast arrived with a sky heavy and gray, the air sharp with the promise of snow. The sea below the cliffs crashed in restless waves, as though the world itself sensed what was to come. By afternoon, guests began to arrive, their carriages winding up the frosted path to the Blackwell estate. Lanterns flickered along the drive, their light glinting on wheels and hooves, casting the visitors in an amber glow as they stepped into the cold night. Inside, the great hall had been transformed. Clara had spared no expense on the feast, though the funds had not truly been hers to spend. The table was laid with silver and crystal gleaming beneath the chandeliers. Tapestries hung fresh along the walls, disguising the age of the stone. Servants hurried with platters of roasted meats, bowls of spiced fruits, and goblets of dark wine. To an unknowing eye, the house looked rich and alive. To me, it looked gaudy, desperate, a mask stretched thin over a crumbling face. I stood near the hearth as the guests entered, greeting them with quiet words. Many smiled politely, but their eyes betrayed unease. I knew the rumors had reached them. I saw the doubt flicker in their gazes, the hesitation as they measured me. Was I still the man they had known for decades? Or was I what Damien and Clara painted me to be, a frail relic fading into madness? I let them wonder. The truth would speak for itself soon enough. Damien swept into the hall with the arrogance of a man already crowned. He wore a finely cut coat of deep blue, his dark hair combed back, his smile broad and practiced. Clara glided at his side, her crimson gown catching the candlelight, her jewels glittering at her throat. She greeted the guests with warmth, her laughter ringing too brightly, too sharply. Beneath her charm I saw the steel. She was ready for the performance of her life. As the last guest arrived and the doors closed, the feast began. Voices filled the hall, the clatter of forks and glasses mingling with laughter that felt brittle at the edges. I ate little, drinking only water, while the others indulged. My heart was steady, my hands calm. The folio rested beside me, plain and unassuming, yet heavier than gold. Damien waited until the meal was nearly done. He rose from his place at the head of the table, raising his glass. The room quieted. Candles flickered in the draught, shadows leaning closer as though eager for the words to come. My family, my friends, Damien began, his voice smooth, his eyes sweeping the hall. Tonight we gather, as we always have, to celebrate tradition, unity, and the bonds that tie us together. But sometimes those bonds must be reshaped. Sometimes tradition must make way for the future. A murmur rippled through the hall. I saw heads turn toward me, eyes narrowing, curiosity sharpening. Clara's hand rested lightly on Damien's arm, her smile growing. My father has served this house well, Damien continued, his tone rising with false reverence. But age has taken its toll. You have all seen it, his forgetfulness, his wandering, his instability. It is with sorrow, but also with duty, that I must declare this truth. He is no longer fit to lead this estate. The words struck like a crack of thunder. Gasps broke from several mouths. A cousin dropped her fork, the sound sharp against the silence. Clara lifted her chin, her eyes gleaming. Damien raised his glass higher. From this night forward, for the good of the Blackwell name, the estate will pass to my care. It is time for new blood, new vision, new strength. For a long moment no one moved. The hall seemed frozen, the storm outside pressing against the windows. All eyes turned to me, waiting. Some expected collapse, others fury. But I gave them neither. Slowly I rose to my feet. My chair scraped against the floor, the sound echoing through the hush. I reached down, lifted the folio, and placed it on the table before me. "My son," I said softly, my voice calm, carrying easily across the hall. "If you believe me unfit, then perhaps it is only fair that you read this." I slid the folio down the table toward him. It landed with a dull thud, the leather plain, the clasp unadorned. Damien frowned, suspicion flickering in his eyes. Clara leaned in, whispering something sharp, urging him to open it. He did. The first page turned, and silence fell heavier than snow. His face paled as he read, his eyes darting back and forth across the words. Receipts, letters, proof of debts so deep they threatened to drown him. Proof of Clara's desperate pleas to creditors. Proof that their wealth was an illusion built on lies. Clara snatched the folio, her eyes scanning the pages. I saw her face harden, her mask cracking. She closed it quickly, but the damage was done. "What is this?" Damien demanded, his voice cracking. "Truth," I said simply. "Your truth, laid bare for all to see." I nodded toward the servants, who stepped forward with small devices, the recorders I had hidden throughout the house. One by one they were placed on the table, their lights glowing. And then the voices began. Clara's whisper, sharp and venomous. "He is slipping. The others see it. All we need is proof, and the estate will be ours." Gasps spread through the hall. Damien's voice followed, dripping with arrogance. "He humiliated me in front of everyone. I will not forgive him. This house should already be mine." The whispers turned to murmurs, then to outrage. Guests leaned forward, their eyes wide, their disbelief giving way to anger. They looked at Damien, at Clara, not with support but with condemnation. Clara's face drained of color. Damien's fists clenched, his jaw tight. He tried to speak, but the words stumbled in his throat. "You speak of tradition," I said, my voice steady. "You speak of strength, but you are careless, greedy, reckless. You would burn this house to ash to feed your vanity. You would poison my name to cover your debts, and you would betray the very family you claim to honor." The room erupted. Accusations, questions, demands. Cousins shouted, neighbors, muttered relatives, leaned away from Damien and Clara, as though their corruption might stain them by touch. The tide had turned swift and merciless. Damien slammed his hands against the table. "This is a lie," he shouted, his voice breaking. "All of it lies." But the recorders still played his own words echoing back at him. Clara tried to rise to speak, but her voice was drowned by the swell of outrage. I remained standing calm amid the storm. I did not shout. I did not gloat. I simply let the truth do its work. The winter feast meant to be their triumph had become their undoing. At last the folio was passed down the table, hands opening it, eyes widening at the evidence. Each page was a nail, each word a hammer sealing Damien and Clara's fate. By the time it reached the far end of the table, no one doubted the truth. Clara sat rigid, her face pale, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. Damien slumped beside her, his shoulders hunched, his triumph shattered. The room that had once echoed with their confidence now weighed heavy with their ruin. I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of family and guests alike. "You asked if I am unfit," I said. "You asked if I have lost my place. Tonight you have your answer. And it is not I who has been found wanting." Silence followed, deep and absolute. The storm outside rattled the windows, but inside there was only the sound of Clara's ragged breathing, of Damien's clenched fists on the table. The showdown was over. The trap had sprung. But the true consequences, their collapse, their exile, their final fall, were yet to come. And as I sat once more in my chair, my heart steady, my face calm, I knew the storm had only just begun to break. The hall was silent except for the sound of the storm clawing at the shutters. Damien sat slumped at the head of the table, his hands gripping the edge as if it might steady him. Clara stared down at her lap, her face pale, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes refusing to meet anyone else's. Around them, the family and guests exchanged looks of shock, anger, and disbelief. For years I had carried the weight of sacrifice for my son. I had given him everything, and in return he had tried to take even more. Now, before the very people he sought to impress, his schemes lay exposed. The evidence was undeniable. Their voices, their debts, their lies, all of it had unraveled in one night. A cousin at the far end of the table was the first to speak. "Arthur was right," she said firmly. "This is disgraceful." Another relative rose to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at Damien. "You would betray your own father. You would spread lies about him. And for what? For jewels and marble floors." The hall erupted. Voices overlapped, sharp and furious. Some shouted at Damien, others at Clara. Neighbors whispered that they had suspected something, but never imagined the depths of their deception. Clara tried to speak, but her words were drowned out by the tide of condemnation. At last Damien stood his chair, scraping back violently. His face burned with shame, but his pride fought to mask it. "This is not over," he hissed. His voice cracked and his eyes darted wildly around the room. "You think you have won, Father, but you have only delayed the inevitable." Clara rose beside him, her composure cracking, but her tone sharp. "We will not be humiliated like this. You will regret this day." They left the hall in a storm of footsteps, the doors slamming behind them. The room fell silent once more. All eyes turned to me. I remained standing, though my heart felt heavy. I had won, yes, but victory carried no joy. I looked around at the faces of my family, my neighbors, my friends. Some were supportive, some still uncertain, but all had seen the truth with their own eyes. "The Blackwell name will endure," I said quietly. "Not because of wealth, not because of power, but because of truth. I will not see this house become a monument to greed. It will remain what it has always been, a place of legacy, of sacrifice, and of family." No one argued. No one questioned. They knew the matter was settled. That night, long after the guests had departed and the hall had fallen silent, I sat alone in my study. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the floor. The folio rested on my desk, its contents spread like scars across the wood. Receipts, letters, recordings, proof of betrayal, proof of ambition gone rotten. I stared at them for a long time. Part of me wanted to burn them to let the ashes carry away the pain they held. But another part of me knew they must remain, at least for now, until the final pieces fell into place. For Damien and Clara did not leave quietly. In the days that followed, their debts came crashing down around them. Creditors came calling, their patience gone. Accounts they had relied upon were frozen contracts, voided promises, broken. Their friends, once eager to bask in their wealth, now abandoned them without hesitation. They begged, they argued, they fought. But the walls closed in, and soon they were left with nothing. The law moved quickly. With John Whitlock's guidance, I secured the estate beyond their reach. Legal papers confirmed what the feast had already made clear. The Blackwell house, the land, the legacy, all of it was safe from Damien and Clara's hands. At last the day came when they were forced to leave. I watched from the balcony as they departed in a single carriage, their belongings piled hastily within. Damien did not look back. Clara did, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment. There was no apology in her gaze, no remorse, only bitterness sharp and unyielding. Then she turned away, and the carriage disappeared down the frost-laden road. The mansion felt lighter after their departure, though emptier too. I wandered its halls in the days that followed, listening to the quiet, remembering Eleanor's laughter, remembering Damien as a boy before ambition had hollowed him. I knew I had done what needed to be done. I had protected the legacy, defended the truth, and preserved the honor of my name. Yet still my heart ached. One evening I sat at my desk and took up my pen. I began to write a letter, not for the courts, not for the family, but for Damien himself. The words came slowly, heavy with the weight of years. "My son," I wrote, "I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. I forgive you because to carry anger any longer would be to carry chains I no longer wish to bear. But know this, forgiveness does not erase what has been done. You chose ambition over loyalty, greed over love. I release you from my heart, but this is goodbye." When the letter was finished, I sealed it and set it aside. Whether he would ever read it, I did not know. But for me it was enough. It was closure. In the weeks that followed, I made one final decision. The house, though preserved, no longer felt like home. Its halls carried too many ghosts, too many memories twisted by betrayal. I put the estate up for sale. When the day came, a young family arrived to walk the grounds. Their children ran through the halls, their laughter ringing like bells, chasing away shadows that had lingered too long. I watched from the study as the parents held hands, their faces bright with hope. I knew then that the house would live again, not as a monument to ambition, but as a place of love and renewal. I moved to a smaller home near the sea. It was nothing like the mansion, no chandeliers, no grand staircases, no sprawling halls. But from my window I could see the horizon stretch endlessly, the waves crashing in eternal rhythm. The ocean had been my teacher all my life, and now in my final years it became my comfort once more. On quiet nights I sat by the window and thought of Eleanor. I thought of her strength, her laughter, her love. I thought of the sacrifices we made together and the son we raised. I knew I could not change what Damien had become, but I also knew I had honored her memory by refusing to let his greed consume all we had built. Snow fell softly one evening, dusting the shore in white. I stepped outside, the cold sharp in my lungs, and watched the flakes settle on the dark waves. For the first time in a long while I felt peace. Not triumph, not bitterness, but peace. The storm had passed. This story is not only about betrayal and revenge, but about the strength it takes to protect what truly matters. Arthur Blackwell endured lies, manipulation, and humiliation, but in the end he chose truth over deceit, patience over rage, and dignity over surrender. His son's greed and Clara's ambition could not break him because justice always finds its way to the surface no matter how deep the shadows. It is a reminder that family is not defined by blood alone, but by loyalty, respect, and love. And it is also a warning that unchecked greed, no matter how carefully hidden, always carries a price. If you were drawn into this story, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others who enjoy powerful stories, and leave a comment below to tell us what you think. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next tale. Your support means everything, and it helps us continue bringing these stories to life for you.